You think your backyard is the last place a stranger could find you? I used to think the same. I built forts there, practiced my first bike tricks there, roasted marshmallows there, and slept under the stars in a tent pitched between the garage and the maple. I thought it was owned by me and my family. Safe, boring, predictable. I was wrong. I want to tell you 3 true stories. Each one happened where we make ourselves small and careless. The lawn, the fire pit, the pool. Each one began ordinary and then folded inward on itself, until the ordinary became a line you do not cross without looking over your shoulder. I still smell the smoke sometimes. I still see an eye where a zipper shouldn't be. I still wonder why a house full of smiling faces stared at me like it was waiting for something. These are the nights that taught me how little control we have, when someone else decides your backyard is their place too. The first one goes back to being 8. To a summer, my older brother Scott got to stay overnight at actual camp, and I had to settle for something smaller, the backyard. We pitched a tent where the grass met the stone path, right under the maple that dropped its long leaves straight into the fire pit. Mom agreed to let me camp solo if she and Dad could sit by the fire and drink hot chocolate, because, of course, they couldn't actually leave a kid alone. Scott was at camp, and I was the substitute scout, proud and tiny, clutching a Game Boy SP with its little hinge light and the yellowed sleeping bag that smelled faintly of detergent and summer. It was supposed to be perfect. The fire cracked. Mosquitoes did their lazy circles. I fell asleep to the glow of the handheld and the muffled voices of my parents leaning back in the lawn chairs, trading stories about their work. I remember unzipping just enough to take a breath of night air, the zipper teeth catching and slipping under my fingers like they were indecisive. I remember thinking, without thinking, that if Scott were here, he'd be bugging me to hand over the Game Boy. I woke because the sleeping bag beside mine was empty. I blinked into a shape where my brother should have been, and the tent suddenly felt 2 sizes too big. My little brother was 4 then, still at preschool age. But that night he was in his bed, I later learned. There was just the hollow where someone should have been, and the small noise of the fire that sounded too loud, like a hiccup. Then the zipper moved. Not a slow crawl, not the sleepy shuffle you get when you nudge a mosquito net. It moved with intention. A gap opened and then closed, like something peeking and deciding whether to step in. I held very still. The tent fabric flattened inward as if someone leaned very close, and then I saw it. A single eye. Not the whole face, not even half, just a human eye, small and intent, framed by the warm brown of someone's cheek and the rim of a cap or the shadow of a haircut. It was looking at me through that tiny slit. My throat closed. I had to swallow hard. The eye didn't blink. I looked back at the zipper's seam so I wouldn't have to look straight at it. My little knot of stomach tightened. The mind goes strange in that state, pulling up images you didn't know you knew. I imagined the man by the fire, the dark of his jacket against the orange light, the way the flames would throw his shadow and make the trees look like they were moving in slow, secret applause. The eye moved along the zipper as if measuring. Then someone crouched outside and said a soft, almost conversational thing. It could have been the wind. It could have been a voice. It was between words and breath. I screamed because nothing else fit. Little lungs doing what they're taught to do when frightened. The sound ripped from me and into the yard. The man bolted. I heard the crunch of leaves, and then silence settling down over the property like an answering hand. My parents were up in a flash. My dad turned his flashlight into a knife of light across the grass. The man was gone. They called the police. The officers took notes, asked if anything was missing, warned us about leaving tents unsupervised. They were gentle, the way adults are when they don't want to terrify a child more than they already are. That night, I slept in our bed under a quilt, while my parents sat up until dawn and rehashed every detail. Weeks later, on the playground, the world pressed back its normalness on me like a bandage. I had to go to school, to eat lunch, to walk in line. And then, during recess, when kids run in packs and the tag games make you forget the day you were careful for an hour, I saw him again. Not at the edge of a yard this time, but leaning against the chain link by the school, the way people lean when they don't belong but insist they do. He recognized me. He said my name. The voice was casual, like someone spotting an acquaintance in aisle 6. "Hey, Tommy, right? You camping out the other night?" I dropped my books and ran in a direction I could name, into the arms of the chaperones, because that was what my body knew how to do. I lied when they asked if I knew him. I lied to protect a family that feared the re-emergence of the same stranger at the wrong moment. My parents called the police again. They kept the lights on that night, even though the summer heat begged to be allowed to sleep. It was never clear who the man was. He may have been wandering and curious, or he may have been watching other yards for a long time. He may have been testing whether a zipper would give. The police took statements. They mentioned a similar call in a neighborhood over, but there was no arrest, I was told, no concrete closure. What stayed with me wasn't the police report, but the image. A human eye in a zipper gap, claiming the thin private world of my tent with a single, casual look. For years I replayed how a child's scream could send a grown man away, and how close those quiet nights really were to something much worse. If you're into true horror stories like this, tap like and subscribe. There's more coming. The second story is older in a different way. I was 22, trying to feel like an adult by furnishing an apartment I couldn't quite afford yet. Facebook Marketplace seemed like destiny, a cream sectional that would make the living room look curated, a road bike that would help me look less like I ate my way through college. The listing had a weird kind of gravity, pictures of a room that overlooked the ocean, a long driveway cut into a cliff, and a house tucked so perfectly against the slope it felt built to disappear. The seller agreed to meet at a time when the tide was low, and the sunset made everything golden and forgiving. The sedan in the driveway was ordinary, and the property seemed quiet in that coastal way, wind through the ornamental grasses, the low screech of gulls. I walked around, imagining how the sectional would fit beneath that window with the ocean beyond it. I went inside because the porch door was unlocked. The place had that coastal, cool staging, white throw pillows, a vase of tall stems, a small smell of lemon and detergent. I took photographs, measured the cushions with my phone like I was making a plan. Everything was oddly perfect, like a set decorated by someone who wanted you to think this life could be yours. When I got to the back of the house, the cliff opened like a promise. The sky looked enormous. I stood there for a while and felt a kind of dizzy gratitude, the fresh air hollowing my chest. Then I turned back. From the back of the lawn, the house looked ordinary again, but then the windows were not ordinary. In each one, someone sat still. It wasn't a bustle of people moving around. It was, at first glance, simply families living thoughtfully in their rooms. Then I noticed their faces. They were all smiling, not laughing, not talking. They were seated at the same angle to the panes, like a row of portrait subjects waiting for a camera. Some of them had hands folded in their laps, some had cups that never moved. The smiles were calm, practiced, as if they'd been told to look pleasant for visitors. I felt that strange clench, like walking into an elevator where everyone else is smiling, and you are the only person with an uncancelled aversion. I walked faster. I walked back to the driveway, where a figure stood on the porch and watched me with the same still attention as the faces in the windows. The man didn't wave. He didn't block my car. He just watched. And for some reason his watching felt like the rest of the house had been staged not for you to shop, but for you to be watched. I didn't have to imagine being in the backyard for them to be pleased. The house looked like it wanted an audience. I drove away with the sectional measurements shrinking in my phone, like a secret. After I left, the neighbor Tom called. I'd caught his number after I tried to confirm the housekeeper's presence, and told me the owner, someone named Jim, didn't live there. Tom said it was supposed to be a vacation rental. The listing disappeared off Marketplace the next day. The police came and found doors unlocked, blinds drawn tight. There was no theft to report, no one had been assaulted. They wrote it down like a checklist item and left, their footsteps on the porch sounding a little too loud in the empty house. I thought about that image for months, the house full of faces whose smiles stayed fixed like weather. I will admit to a kind of narrative my brain prefers in the absence of answers. Maybe they were friends. Maybe they'd been told to stay put and smile for the buyer. Maybe they were mannequins placed by some odd decorator. Any of those could be true. It's also possible they were waiting for something to happen in that backyard that wasn't about furniture at all. The idea that my presence could have been the point, that someone might have wanted someone else there in that little private space, kept me awake the night I moved in 2 years later into my own apartment and heard the unfamiliar creak of a neighbor's life through the walls. There is an uncanny quality to staged friendliness. It looks harmless, and yet there's a threat in its certainty. You can sense the boundary being set, not with a fence, but with the slow, quiet turning of a person into a prepared shape. That house wanted faces to look at the ocean. It also seemed to enjoy having someone to look at. Why that day? Why me? I never got an answer that satisfied the small, furious part of me that wanted to throw a chair through a window and demand to know whether I'd just walked through a setup to encourage me to step into a backyard with the wrong intentions. The house became a ghost in my head. For weeks I watched the gothic of it unfold every time I drove by that stretch of coast. The blinds might be open, the faces might be gone, the listing might pop back up in different colors. All of it felt like evidence of an idea more than of a person, a concept of monitoring, of someone staging a backyard as an arena. The police logged the call. Tom called me to say he'd talked to someone named Jim who said he hadn't been there. The story had no closure. It left a mark instead, the lingering impression that someone had taken a domestic scene, windows, smiles, a lawn, and repurposed it into a watchtower. The third story is the one that changed how I moved through my own home. It happened at a party. We live in a house with a pool tucked behind the privacy of a row of evergreens and a wood line that feels like a curtain drawn against the rest of the world. The party had been a normal kind of noise. Friends sprawled over towels, Mark playing DJ, laughter soft and a little too loud because alcohol has that habit of blowing up ordinary things. A week before, someone at the party thought they heard a cough come from the trees behind the pool. We laughed it off. The woods were always full of small sounds. Kids told ghost stories near the shallow end like someone testing the pool's edges. At around 2 in the morning, the house had thinned. Most of the guests were gone. A few stayed behind, sitting round the deck with cigarettes and that slump of tiredness in their shoulders. I went to bed, thinking the world would settle. The pool pump hummed in the background like an appliance that sleeps with us. I woke to water. Not the deep panic that comes when you imagine someone has drowned, but a lonely, precise splash, like a stone dropped into a glass. From my bedroom window, I could just see the glow of the pool light carved into the yard. There was a silhouette moving against the surface, cutting the circle of light into ripples. At first, I thought it was one of my friends messing around. Then I remembered the car keys were on Mark's table upstairs. He was supposed to have left. The shape in the water wasn't supposed to be there. A human figure swam slowly toward the far edge. He climbed out like a cat, water sliding from his shoulders. He moved from the grass, over the pavers, and toward the sliding door. The door, which we'd always left locked when we slept, shifted. I heard it, high and small, as if something had tested the threshold and found it softer than promised. The door opened and shut. The house doesn't move often at that hour. The air grew heavy, with the smell of chlorine and rain in a way that didn't belong together. I locked my bedroom from inside and dialed 911, breathing in a rhythm I fought to keep even. I told the operator where I was, what I could see, A man in the pool, wet footprints on the deck, the sliding door nudged open. She told me to stay on the line. She asked me if anyone else was in the house. I told her everyone had left except for a friend who'd gone to get himself together in the den. The man walked up my stairs. He knocked on a door down the hall. He said, in a voice that's now fixed in my memory for its bold normalcy, "It's me. Open the door." I could hear the water drip onto the floor as he moved, and then the knock again. 3 patient, deliberate knocks that turned into pleading. The moment was absurd in the most terrifying way. Someone had crossed from the private yard into what should have been the fully private home, and was now asking for the door to be opened as if he had a right. The 911 operator had asked me to remain calm. I couldn't, but I did my best, whispering answers into a receiver that felt too small for the situation. I told her where I was. I told her I would not open the door. I told her someone was at the door, saying my name and insisting he was one of my friends. He wasn't. The intruder left after I said police were coming. I heard retreating feet, the scrape of wet soles on concrete. The water left a trail down the walkway, wet marks that led to the street, and then stopped like a sentence cut off mid-phrase. The police arrived and did what they do. They looked for any sign of forced entry. They checked cameras on neighboring houses. They took my statement. They found the water trail. They found nothing else. That fear doesn't leave with the sunrise. The knowledge that someone can be in the same air as you, having paddled in your pool, walked through your yard, touched your doorknob, and then simply walk away into the dark without a struggle, is a concept that rearranges your bones. The idea that they might return later, or that someone else might be watching from the trees, wraps around ordinary routines like frost. You learn to sleep with the radio on. You check the yard before going to bed like a soldier checking his perimeter. You double-check that sliding door before you stop reading the news at night. These are small, private changes, but they add up. After each of these events, the police did the things they always do. They took statements. They checked the house and the yard. They told us to be careful and to call if anything else happened. They recorded the open doors, the water trails, the sightings. They did not prosecute. There were no arrests mentioned. That absence of closure is part of what these stories share. We had evidence enough to know something had been wrong. A man at a zipper, faces at the windows, wet footprints up to a locked bedroom door, but not enough to turn those moments into a neat courtroom ending. In some ways, that emptiness is worse than a verdict. It leaves the question open like an invitation. What ties these 3 together is not just that they happened in backyards. It's that each one used that intimate, ordinary space as a stage to unsettle a private world. The backyard is where we teach our children to ride bikes. It's where we blame the dog for digging. It's where we feel the safety to be barefoot. It's where someone else can quietly practice being present until you stop noticing them. In each case, an intruder didn't break a window or shout threats. They used small human habits to erase boundaries. A zipper peeking, a quiet smile through a pane, a splash at 2 a.m. Those small breaches are the ones that keep you awake because they are plausible, simple enough not to draw notice until it's almost too late. I don't tell these stories to make you paranoid. I tell them because trauma isn't only about what happens in a single instant. It's about how that instant rewrites the landscape of your life. After the tent, I couldn't unsee the way a person could hide where a zipper closed. After the house with the smiling faces, the ordinary grin in a window made my skin tighten. After the pool, the sound of water anywhere late at night is a small alarm in my head. These are not victories for me to parade. They are scars I carry in the way I walk through my yard and the way I teach my friends' kids to come inside when the lights go out. There are moments I replay and imagine different endings. What if I hadn't screamed? What if I'd confronted the man at the pool? What if I'd knocked on the window and asked the faces in the house what they were doing? Those questions are useless exercises in counterfactual grief. They make the mind busy, but don't bring back agency. The only thing that helps is a small, stubborn insistence that the world should be remembered rightly, the exact way it was when your parents called the police, when the listing vanished, when the water made a path to the street. Sometimes people say you should do something practical, change your locks, meet in public spaces, take a self-defense class, and those aren't bad ideas. But advice becomes a sermon when it assumes the past can be unwound by a checklist. The truth is messier. We live with the knowledge of what happened, and we layer new habits over it like clothing. We teach our kids that tents are for supervised sleepovers. We look at listings and notice not only the price, but the faces in the windows. We check our pools at night. These are not guarantees. They are the small armor we can afford. If you've had something similar happen, if there's a night you still think about, a fence line you still avoid, say something in the comments. Hearing other stories doesn't fix things, but it reminds you that you're not the only person cataloging strange nights. If you want another unsettling story, there's one linked over there you might like. In the end, the image I carry is stubbornly ordinary. An eye at the seam of a zipper, bright and curious, a row of smiles held perfectly in place behind glass, a wet footprint leading to a locked door. They should be mundane, even comforting images. Instead, they are the trespassers of my quiet hours. Lock your door if it helps. Keep your kids in your sight if it soothes you. Or don't. The point isn't to tell you how to live. The point is to tell you that sometimes the places we think belong to us, our backyards, our porches, our patch of sky above a sleeping bag, are the very spaces someone else will choose to invade, quietly and without notice. And that knowledge makes ordinary nights feel a little less like home and a little more like waiting.